when we come to the waters, to the baptismal font, here on Sunday mornings, you don't really get a sense of it being dangerous and not even something spontaneous. And in our day, in our time, baptism is this moment that is often planned and scheduled, put on the calendar, sometimes months in advance, with printed out liturgy so everybody knows their part, everybody knows what they're supposed to say and what's going to happen. There's little sense of danger here. There's little sense of anything unplanned or surprising. We have it all down to musical cues. Who will say what? Who will do what? Even in this place, we can make the water warm enough so that it doesn't startle the person being baptized by being too cold. These are all lovely, lovely touches we have in our time and place. But it's easy, because of all that comfort and all that scheduling, it's easy to forget how dangerous a thing it is, how wild and audacious a thing it is to be brought to the waters to be baptized. We get a sense of that wildness in the story of Jesus being baptized. Because unlike our modern practice here in churches of baptism, where we schedule it, we can turn up the heat on the water, we can sing the right songs, and everything feels like it's all planned, the story of Jesus being baptized feels like it comes out of nowhere. At least this coming Sunday, as we hear the story out of Mark's Gospel, it's sort of out of nowhere. There's first John the Baptizer gathering anybody who comes to him out in the wilderness, baptizing people as this act of repentance, as this act of turning away from an old life and turning toward God. And there's all these crowds coming, and Mark just says, yeah, and Jesus was there too. Jesus shows up to be baptized, but without announcing his arrival, without scheduling it or getting a notice in the paper. Jesus just shows up there among everybody else. And in that moment, the wildness, the danger, the gravity of the moment is clear, at least the way Mark tells it. When Jesus is coming up out of the water, there's no pre-printed program for the script everybody's supposed to follow. Instead, Mark says the heavens are torn open. It's this violent image of being ripped apart. And a voice says, "You are my Son, the beloved." In other words, this is a moment where God goes on record claiming Jesus as God's own child. It's a moment that has its own sort of violence to it, as the heavens themselves are torn apart. There's nothing scheduled or planned. There's something untamed and wild and undomesticated about this moment of Jesus coming up alongside all these other people, being baptized by John, and this moment, the heavens being ripped apart. Sometimes I think we forget what's going on when we are brought to the waters, and that it is something powerful, not something merely sentimental. It's easy in the age of pre-printed church bulletins and scheduled baptismal dates to treat this as just a lovely little ceremony with water, when there is something far more powerful going on. It is about God's claim on us, saying the same as God's voice said to Jesus, "You're my child, I claim you." And of all the other voices out there that want to claim us, that want us to give them our allegiance, it's about letting God's voice claim us, stake a claim on us, hold us, and say, whatever anybody else says, you belong to me, you are mine. And to discover that listening to that voice and taking that seriously will change the course of our lives. For Jesus, it's this moment that leads to Jesus' public ministry. Prior to this moment, for all we know, Jesus was living a quiet, mild-mannered life, maybe working in the family business, maybe building things. Everybody seems to know him as, yeah, you know Jesus, he's from Joseph and Mary's house in Nazareth. Basically harmless, basically could dissolve into a crowd and disappear, but from this moment on, everything changes. Jesus takes seriously, yeah, if I'm God's child, if I'm God's son, then I'm called to be present in the world, to bring life, to bring healing, to speak up, to hang out with the anybody's and the nobodies and the outcast and the neglected, to embody and bring God's reign of justice and mercy. This is the moment that starts all of that off, and it begins with taking seriously God breaking through the barriers, the very boundary of the heavens and the earth themselves, to say, you are my son, you are beloved. Jesus' whole life from there on is living out God's claim on him, and taking that more seriously than what anybody else wants him to be, what other molds they want him to fit into. It's that big a deal. And Jesus knows, too, that taking seriously what God says about him will eventually set him at odds with the powers of the day. Jesus knows that his way of being God's son, his way of being the Messiah everybody's waiting for, isn't to fit their expectations, but rather to be willing to go the way of the cross. And to go the way of the cross for Jesus means he knows his story is going to mean laying down his own life for the sake of a whole world full of people who are also beloved of God, waiting to hear they are children of God too. In fact, the moment of Jesus' baptism echoes another moment that comes at the end of the story that I think Mark, the storyteller, wants us to connect. At the moment of Jesus' baptism, the heavens are torn open, and there comes the voice from God. And at the moment Jesus dies on the cross, you might know this detail. Mark says the curtain in the temple is torn apart from top to bottom, using the same word, the same exact language in his Greek. That curtain in the temple that's meant to sort of symbolize the boundary between God's space and human space, that within, behind that curtain, that's God's dwelling place. And at Jesus' death, that boundary, that barrier is torn apart, as if to say, what happens at Jesus' baptism is completed or fulfilled there at Jesus' death. The boundary between God and us ripped apart. But at the moment of Jesus' baptism, coming up out of the water, he knows that's the course his life is charting on. It will no longer be just keeping your head down, living the successful Galilean dream, and getting 2.5 kids, a white picket fence, and a dog. It's instead the life that embodies the reign of God. To take seriously what happens at the waters is wild and powerful and can't be domesticated, tamed, or even scripted. In our day, sure, when we bring a new saint to be claimed in the waters, we have the luxury, and let's call it a luxury, we have the luxury of scheduling the day on the calendar, having a photo op for everybody to watch it, even heating the water. But don't miss the wildness of what happens when we come to the waters and hear spoken the same claim of God spoken for Jesus. That claim that tears apart the boundary between heaven and earth to reach us, that says, you are my child. And as a result of being God's own child, you and I, we are called to live differently, to be people who embody God's kind of life in the world, rather than whatever other quiet lives we might have lived, rather than giving our allegiances to whatever other powers of the day want us to give our hearts to them. Political parties, our jobs, our money, our titles, none of those things. No, we are children of God. We dare to believe what's told to us at the waters. This coming Sunday, we're going to explore what it means that Jesus was baptized like we are, and also maybe what it means for us to be baptized in light of that wild, powerful, earth-shattering, heaven-tearing moment of Jesus coming up out of the waters too. And we'll hear again those words spoken to Jesus are words for you and for me. You are my child, God says. You are beloved. Taking that seriously in this day, in this week, that changes everything. See you Sunday.